Jenny Torres Sanchez is the author of Because of the Sun, Death, Dickinson, and the Demented Life of Frenchie Garcia, The Downside of Being Charlie, and The Downside of Being Charlie, excuse me. She was born in Brooklyn, New York, but has lived on the border of two worlds her whole life. She lives in Orlando, Florida, with her husband and children. Please welcome Jenny Torres Sanchez.
Hello. How am I going to follow that? You guys can hear me okay? Yes? Yes? Okay, thank you. So thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to be here and speak to you tonight. I'm going to start off talking a little bit about when I was a teenager. When I was a teenager, people told me that these were the best years of my life. And I thought, please God, no, because I hated being a teenager. I worked a lot as a teenager, and I wasn't involved in many clubs, and I wasn't involved in many extracurricular activities. And my father was a pretty angry guy, and my house was a very tense place to be that I wanted to escape. So all I could think when I heard those words were, they don't know what they're talking about. I couldn't wait for those teen years to be over and behind me. It wasn't all bad. I had a driver's license. I had a car that only broke down sometimes. I had a handful of friends, 2 or 3, who were pretty amazing individuals. And we would drive around aimlessly, listening to music too loud and going nowhere, but talking about how life was going to be better someday, right? We were teens whose circumstances were not the best. We were dealing with heavy, difficult issues of our own. We still had to deal with the everyday stress and problems of adolescence on top of things that we did not understand and that were beyond our control. We were teens just trying to survive. Later, as a teacher, I had students who were also just trying to survive. I once had a student whose father died. And when that student came back to class, I remember him sitting in the classroom looking shell-shocked, looking around him and just wondering how life was still going on as normal for everyone else when his life had just completely fallen apart. Years after that, I had a student whose mother died one evening, and I got an email, and I read it, and the next morning, he showed up to class. And he acted like his usual self. If I hadn't received that email, I wouldn't have had any idea of what had happened the night before. I remember we studied Shakespeare that day, and he followed along like he always did. And the students who were sitting around him had no idea what he was dealing with. Another time I had a student who didn't turn in an essay. And I was kind of getting on his case and busting his chops for it. And I asked him why, and he said, "You're right, I waited until the last minute, but I swear I was going to do it last night. Except my mother and her boyfriend got in a fight and the cops were at our house most of the evening." I've known teens who had to deal with all kinds of issues and problems and things that nobody would imagine they are going through. They are the teen that is walking down the street, that is sitting in a classroom, that is walking down the hallway, that is going to a football game. And they usually are acting pretty normal. Sometimes they're even smiling. What helped me when I was a teenager to feel less confused and alone was music, poetry, and books. When I was a teenager, there wasn't a whole lot of young adult literature like there is today. So I just got lost in whatever my English teachers were teaching me or whatever they had in their classrooms. So I know, thank you English teachers for having books in your classrooms. But I would have loved back then to have come across a book that had a teenage protagonist, who had a teenager who was dealing with everyday teenage problems, but also some heavier real life issues. So that's why I write young adult literature. And that's why I write books that reflect the experience of kids who are just going through the rawness of life. Teens who by chance have been dealt a pretty bad set of cards, but who are still trying to survive. Because I know those kids exist. So I'm going to read a couple of passages tonight from my book, Because of the Sun. This is the story of Danny Falls. She's a teenage girl who's been dealt a pretty bad set of cards. She has an incredibly strained relationship with her mother. Her mother is not very motherly. She drinks too much. She has a lot of boyfriends. She's moved them from place to place. She pays very little attention to her daughter, Danny. And when she does, she is verbally abusive most times, physically abusive sometimes. Danny doesn't understand her mom, and she feels very unloved by her, and she wonders who her mother is and why she even keeps Danny around. Before she has time to figure it out, Danny's mom is killed violently in a bear attack when she's sunbathing here in Florida. After the attack, Danny is pretty traumatized, and she starts to live in this kind of shell-shocked mode, and she is trying to stay just numb because she does not want to deal with everything that is going on. But she is shipped off to live with an aunt in New Mexico, her mother's sister, Shelley, and she did not even know this aunt existed because her whole life her mother has told her, "It's just you and me, Danny. We are all each other has in the world." But before she knows it, she is in the stark, bare deserts of New Mexico, Columbus, New Mexico, which is a kind of ghost town that is about 5 minutes from the Mexican border. Here, Danny takes long walks in the desert, just trying to stay numb, just trying to forget her mother, just trying to forget her whole situation. She doesn't want to think about their relationship or about her death or about what it all meant. But she keeps getting flashbacks, and the memories keep bubbling up, and she keeps remembering her mom even though she doesn't want to. So this first passage I'm going to read is one of the memories that Danny has of her mother. I suddenly remember the house Mom rented before the last one we lived in. It was pink, the pinkest damn shade of pink I'd ever seen. "Isn't it great?" she said as we pulled into the driveway. I shrugged. It was pretty horrible, actually. 4 bedrooms, she said, smiling and looking at the house like it was one of the wonders of the world. 4 bedrooms. I couldn't imagine what she wanted with all that space, but it was what she bragged about most whenever we moved to a new place. Nothing less than 4 bedrooms, like I cared. It was stupid since there were just the 2 of us, sometimes 3 since Mom's boyfriends always ended up mostly moving in. Even so, we didn't need anything bigger than an apartment, a duplex, a small 2-bedroom house at most. It would have been easier, cheaper too, though Mom never worried about money, and neither did I until I was old enough to realize she couldn't pay rent with the waitressing jobs she'd get here and there, but she always paid it. I knew she got money from men somehow. More than that, I didn't know, and I didn't want to know. "Why?" I mumbled without meaning to. I remember the early evening was cast in my favorite kind of light. It had been raining, and the earth smelled wet and beautiful too. I wanted to enjoy the moment, but the first shot had been fired. Why? What? Why do we have to move? Why 4 bedrooms? I mean, we don't really need 4 bedrooms. She shook her head. "You're such an ungrateful little shit. You know that?" I looked down at the sidewalk, slipped off my flip-flops, and felt the wet concrete under my feet. I thought about whether I was a little shit or not. She always did that, asked me a question I couldn't answer, one that left me silent, taking her crap. I listened to the way she drew a deep breath. "Because," she said, loud, sharp, her voice cutting through the air. "Look at me," she yelled, and I did. "We moved because there is always better, always, and I deserve it." I could have said she didn't deserve anything, but I didn't because I didn't want her to smack me. Not in that perfect light, not out there on the street with people peeking out their windows, taking us in, already making judgments about Mom's cut-off shorts that showed half her ass and the tank top that was too low, too tight, too skimpy. And 4 bedrooms because that's what I want, because I want space, to not feel like the goddamn walls are closing in on me. Is that all right with you, Danny? Or would you rather live in some little shithole where you can't even breathe? What she meant was some little shithole where I was within arm's distance of her everywhere she turned, where I was the constant that she couldn't escape, where she couldn't send me to the other side of the house so she could be left alone to do whatever she did with whatever guy it was that week. What she needed, what she wanted was room, space, distance, so she didn't feel like I was closing in on her, where I wasn't sucking the air out of her nose, her mouth, her lungs, where I wasn't killing her. Forget it, I said. She laughed the way you laugh at someone you hate. You're incredible, you know that? No, yes, what the hell was I supposed to say? I don't think you really mean that, I said. The words were out, and they sounded as sarcastic as they had in my head, and it felt good, and I was proud of myself. She stared at me. Fuck you, Danny. You had to ruin this, didn't you? You always have to ruin everything. I didn't want it to hurt, but it did. I had to ruin everything? Me? Fuck you, I thought. Fuck you right back, Mom. But I wondered if she was right. If I ruined everything, if I ruined her. She grabbed some stuff from the car and went inside the house. And I stayed put, feeling the ground under my feet, looking at how the rose-colored evening had turned ugly, and imagining what my life would be like one day without her in it. So that's one excerpt. I'm going to read 2 more. So the second one is, in this passage, Danny has taken a long walk in the desert, which is not a good idea at all. It's 100 degrees outside. She is just trying to burn away the memories of her mother. And she made it to a gas station that is relatively nearby. She goes inside and just kind of roams the aisles. And she notices the guy at the counter, who ends up becoming her friend later on. But at this time, they don't really know each other. And she goes in, and while she's in there, she steals some gum. I carefully put my hand in my pocket, tucking several pieces of gum there. I walk on toward the drinks, beer, water, soda in every color. But none of it is as pretty as that gum, and I'm anxious to leave, to feel the crunch of it in my mouth, the sweetness of it flow onto my tongue. I make myself walk slowly. I make myself look bored. And then I walk to the front, past the guy at the register. My head throbs and my eyes won't focus, but I continue outside to the bright sun, the orange dust, the only things that make sense to me now. The air is still hot, but cooler than inside the store, and I can smell it, heat and dust and burning. Each breath I take brings it into my lungs. I feel in my pocket for the tightly wrapped gum. I take a piece out and admire its bright, bright pink before opening it and popping a single square into my mouth. It tastes just like I knew it would, like Pepto-Bismol. She'd give me Pepto-Bismol when I had a stomach ache. I hated it. It made me gag, but she'd make me take it even as I choked on the thick liquid. One time I spit it out all over the floor, and the neon pink splashed on our feet and across the white tile like some kind of art piece. I remember how striking it looked right before she whacked me so hard on the side of my head I thought my head had fallen off. Hard enough that a hot electric sensation zapped through my neck. She was a blur then, her hand over her mouth, horrified. I cried, and the way she stared at me, frozen like that, I thought maybe I was headless, or maybe pink rivers were flowing from my eyes. I'm sorry, she said, I'm sorry, she kept saying as she refilled the spoon, her hands shaking. Just take it, please just take it. I couldn't stand the pain in my stomach. I didn't want to be swiped on the side of my head again. I didn't want her hands to keep shaking the way they were shaking, but I wouldn't open my mouth. I knew it would make her angry, but I didn't care. She yelled and told me how I made her do it, so I shut my lips tighter. But then she held me somehow so my nose was plugged, and then she shoved that spoon into my mouth and made it clatter against my teeth so that I thought they might break. I gagged but could do nothing but swallow the pink slime, and that made me get angrier and cry harder while she cursed and walked away and slammed the door to her room. I went to my own room, my feet sticky with pink, and I crawled into bed and closed my eyes and wished the world would disappear. Only when I was too tired to cry anymore, when I was somewhere dark and beautiful, did I feel the warm wetness of a towel wiping my feet, and then the warmth of her hands as she kneeled at my bed and held my hands. But I was so far into that dark and beautiful, I couldn't open my eyes, and I just felt her tears on my hands, her lips on my forehead, her words slipping into my ears, into my dreams. She was sorry. And I loved her so much in that moment, even though there was a part of me where the hate was growing. I popped the second and third and fourth squares of gum in my mouth. Each time I crunch through one, I see an explosion of pink behind my eyelids and the thick liquid gushes into my mouth. I can feel sweat all over me and how the dirt sticks to my skin when I fall and stare up at the impossibly bright sky. It's so white, so hot, that I can't hear anything except what's inside my head. It feels like I'm in an airplane, and suddenly I wonder if I am, if the world is going in reverse, and I wonder if this is what it feels like to be unborn. Thank you. And then one last passage, and I just have to explain to you real quick something. In the state of shock that Danny is living in after her mother dies, she begins to have these visions of the bear that killed her mother. And she thinks that this bear is haunting her, and she thinks that this bear somehow holds the answer to who her mother was and what Danny meant to her and what their relationship was really all about. So just keep that in mind, that sometimes Danny is haunted by this bear. It's been 72 days since Mom died. At night, I make another slash on the calendar and then take out the postcard I've kept in my book. I get up in the dark house and head to the kitchen where Shelley leaves the computer. I wonder what I would tell her if she woke up and saw the glow of the screen on my face. Would I say I'm looking up the address of the cemetery? Would I say I'm sending my mother a postcard? I find the address, write it down. Back in my room, I stare at the blank space for a message. I put the postcard away in the pages of The Stranger, then get up and take it out again. I can't think of anything I'd say to her, and then words crowd my mind. Danny was here. Were you ever here? Why'd you keep all of this a secret? Who were you? Did I know you? Did you love me? I look down at my writing that doesn't even seem like my own, and then I hear him outside my window, roaring softly. What more do you want? I whisper to him. He roars and growls again, and I reach over to turn off the light, but before I do, I write one more thing. Are you sending the bear? And that's it. Thank you.